Okay, good afternoon. Good morning for those of you out on the West Coast. Today this is Sean Rogers here at Zycel, and today we're doing our Nebula webinar. This is just sort of a brief high-level overview of our Nebula cloud management solution. So this is for those of you that are new to Zycel and aren't that familiar with Nebula. And those of you that have been around for a while, or maybe just looking for a little bit of a refresher, maybe you've been ignoring the cloud up to this point, and you're thinking about finally making that jump to cloud-based management. So as we go through today, if you have any questions, in the Zoom interface, there is a question and answer section. Use question and answer because I can see that as we go through. Chat messages I cannot easily see. So if you can, anything, even if it's not a question, send it in with question and answer, and I'll do my best to answer those. So go ahead and get started. So the idea here, you'll see it says hello, simpler managed IT. And that's kind of the design philosophy here, making it easier for you to manage your customers and their sites. So Nebula's been around for a while. It launched all the way back in 2016. And it was the first what we call a full stack cloud management solution that was aimed at the SMB space. At this point in time, cloud management was really being pioneered by people like Cisco's Meraki, um, Aerohive, et cetera. And they were really focused on the enterprise space, providing management for large campuses and things like that. And we saw a real opportunity here to try to address the demands of small to medium businesses rather than shooting and competing for the big enterprise products. So that's what we did. So we launched back in 2016. We had security gateways, switches, and access points. And since then, we've continued to add products and we've constantly been improving the Nebula interface, adding new features, etc. So Nebula itself is made up of a couple different components here. We've got our hardware products here, our switches, access points, etc. We have our mobile app, which is primarily aimed at for use by installers, although it's a nice little tool for just keeping a quick eye on what's going on your customer sites. The main part of Nebula, though, is what we call the Nebula Control Center, NCC, and that's the Nebula website. To get to it, you simply go to nebula.zycel.com, log in, and there all of your customers are. So that's really the lifeblood of Nebula itself. So shown up here on the screen is, sort of all the things that go into deploying a new network, from purchasing the equipment, installing the equipment, setting up monitoring, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea behind Nebula is to simplify this. So you have to buy less, you have to do less. And because you're doing less, things can be done quicker, saving you both money directly and money via the idea that saving time saves you money. So there's a lot of things here what you see highlighted in gray areas where things should either there should be less that you need to buy, or where things simply go a lot smoother, such as installing equipment. As we'll get to it here, it just takes a few minutes to set things up. You don't even necessarily need to be on site to do so. Monitor is handled in the cloud. Remote access is handled through the cloud. So there's no setting up VPNs or port forwards and things like that. Logs can be stored in the cloud. Updates are done over the air, et cetera, et cetera. So now we'll go through and talk a little bit more in depth on some of the nice features here in Nebula. So one of the key ones here is you can be up and running in just a couple minutes. We've got a number of different wizards to help simplify setting things up. And just by default, a lot of the basic settings, are going to be good enough to get things up and going. We used to do a demo back in the day where you would take an access point that's never been used before, and you would set it up with multiple SSIDs. You would have a captive portal for guest access, and everything from creating the Zycel Nebula account to having that AP broadcasting the SSIDs and having that captive portal up and running took less than 5 minutes. So part of the reason why it takes such little time, in addition to just wizards and simplified interface, is the fact you can start setting things up without ever having to take the hardware out of the box. So today you can log into Nebula even if you've never bought a piece of Nebula equipment. You can start setting up your customers and their sites, and a lot of the core settings you can start doing today, even before you finalize the exact specific hardware you're going to want. When it comes to assigning products to Nebula, there is a QR code located on the product and on the outside of the box. So you can have the boxes shipped to your office. You simply use the mobile app, scan the QR codes, assign those devices to your customers, and then ship the hardware off to the site. And the Nebula client is built into the hardware itself. There's nothing else that needs to be set up or configured. So as soon as you plug those devices into a valid internet connection and with power, they will reach out to the cloud. They will find out that they've already been assigned to a customer and to a site. And they'll automatically update their configuration based on that. They'll automatically update their firmware. So everything is up and running and ready to go. Now, there are two exceptions to this. The first one is the GS1350 series switches. Those switches, you do have to go into the Nebula interface, or excuse me, into the device's GUI and tell them to use Nebula. The other products will just automatically do it, but the GS1350s are the exception. And then our security gateways are also exceptions. And the reasons for that is because you want a little bit more security on that gateway connection. And the GS1350 switches are aimed at IP camera market, where again, you want a little bit extra layer of security. So there's some changes made there, some extra steps just from a security standpoint to make sure somebody doesn't hijack your hardware, since it is internet facing itself. So in order to use Nebula, as I mentioned, the Nebula agent is built into our hardware. So because of that, there's no software you need to buy. There's no cloud keys. There's no CNC devices. There's no virtual machines you have to set up and load software on, nothing like that. It's simply plug it in and you are good to go. So Nebula was designed to be managed remotely. So no matter where you are, as long as you have a web browser and an internet connection, you have the ability to monitor, configure, and update your customers' sites. Nebula makes doing guest access easy, whether we're talking about being something like an office building where you want to provide guests to visiting customers or vendors, or whether you're talking something a little bit more consumer focused, like guest access at a coffee shop or restaurant or even a small hotel. So Nebula has captive portal functionality built in. We've got some default templates that you can use. You can go into the Nebula interface and modify those through a really simple editor to add in your logo and change some of the content and colors. If you need more customization than that, you can download the CSS and HTML files, modify them, re-upload them to the cloud. And of course, we can always point to a server you host instead. And we'll give you the code to add to your own website to interface with Nebula. And we've got a lot of flexibility with how we do that. With the free version of Nebula here, you've got the ability to do a terms of service agreement page, the ability to use usernames and passwords, the ability to have users log in and create their own username, the ability to log in with Facebook. So a lot of flexibility with how the captive portals work. And to use the captive portal on our access points, you just need the access points. You don't need to do anything special on the switch or gateway. The hotspot or captive portal functionality is directly built into the APs themselves. And then we also do offer that feature through our gateway for wired connections or for situations where you may be, combining Nebula gateways with different vendors' access points. So when it comes to wireless, it's got the features you would expect. All of our APs in Nebula support smart mesh. So if you've got areas that need to be covered where you, for whatever reason, you can't get a hardwire connection to, you can use mesh to extend that network to those areas. We support the latest WPA2 and WPA3 security standards, including WPA3 Enterprise with 802.1x authentication. And we support all of the fast roaming standards, 802.11r, KV, to make sure if you're doing something like, voice over Wi-Fi, that it's going to be able to handle that smoothly and easily. On the switch side of things with Nebula, we've got our Zycel's, intelligent PoE management, where we can free up your budget based on your PoE budget, based on the actual PoE demand of connected devices. We've got a number of security features built into Nebula, such as ACLs, VLANs, loop guards, DHCP guard, etc. And the ability to do what's basically virtual switch stacking. So you can go in and configure ports across multiple switches at the same time. And then everything is done over the air. So there's no having to remote into the site. There's nothing like that. You simply go into the Nebula interface, make your configuration changes, schedule your firmware updates, and it'll automatically happen and be pushed out to the access points and client devices. So because of this, it can take 2 or 3 minutes between when you make a change in Nebula and when it's reflected on the device itself. So that is something that's a little bit different for those of you that are used to managing things directly, where you simply hit apply and either the change takes effect or the device reboots and applies the changes. So with Nebula, there is a little bit more of a delay, but it should only be 2 or 3 minutes between when you save and when it's pushed out. So and on the security side of things, we do have some number of tools to make VPNs easier using Nebula. So if you're doing site-to-site VPNs, you simply go into the Nebula interface, choose the sites you want to mesh together, choose the topology you want to use for your VPNs, and hit apply, and we take care of everything else on the back end. When it comes to remote users, we have the ability to email out a script to those users. So they simply run that script and it'll handle configuration for them. And that'll configure remote VPN access for Windows PCs, Mac PCs, and iOS devices. And Nebula was designed from the ground up from day one with the idea that you're going to be managing multiple customers, and those customers may have multiple sites. So we've really spent a lot of time in the interface making it easy for you to quickly move from customer to customer or site to site. You can see this view here. This is a customer with multiple sites. So you log in, you can see all of the sites. We've got the ability to visually represent those on Google Maps and a quick overview snapshot of what's going on in those sites. How many devices are online, how many devices are offline, etc. From that point, you click into the site you want to manage, and it takes you to this dashboard here. As you can see, there's a number of widgets across the top of the screen. That's customizable, so you can see just the data you want to see. We make it really easy to change your customers or change sites. We've got simple drop-down menus right there at the top of the page. Simply drop down one of those menus, choose a new customer or new site, and it will take you there. Device configuration is done over here on the left-hand side of the screen. And then in the center, we've got all this data that's shown in those widgets. So depending on what devices you're using and how you've configured things, you could be seeing things like PoE budget available versus in use, how many wireless users are currently online, what sort of, which users are using different amounts of bandwidth, which users are using, not just which users, but which applications are using up your bandwidth, security hits, things like that. So some of the other pages you'll see here. So here's what you see is your wireless status screen. So it's showing you your wireless users that have been connected to Nebula. So as you can see there, it'll show you which users are currently connected, which users have been connected in the past. And we've got a wealth of information you can choose to display there about the status of those customers, what the MAC address is, what brand of network card they were using, which channel they were using, which data rate, which AP they were connected to. And again, that's all customizable what you see, and you can choose the amount of time you want to see. So you can see it over the past hour, the past 2 hours, the past day, etc. On the switch side of things, same thing. You've got a chart here showing you bandwidth utilization over the time that you select. Up at the top here, you've got a breakdown of your ports and visually letting you know whether the device plugged into that port is a gigabit device, a slower device, whether that port is currently being used to provide PoE power or not. So a quick, easy way to see what's going on. When it comes to configuration, you can simply choose multiple ports across as many different switches as you want. And then it pulls up a configuration page here where you can easily, set the configurations, things such as your VLAN settings and whatnot, and have it automatically apply those across all of those ports. So everything I've talked about to this point is free with Nebula. So Nebula doesn't require you to buy anything else. The agents and the ability to talk to the cloud is built into our Nebula compatible hardware, and the Nebula cloud itself is free for you to use. The free version of Nebula has no limit to the number of sites or devices that you can manage. So there's not one of those things where, hey, it's free for the first two and then you've got to start paying. No, it's absolutely free. Um, and all of the core features of the devices are available as part of the free version of Nebula. Now, when you're looking at our products, when we originally launched Nebula back in the day, it was similar to the Cisco and Meraki route, where if you wanted cloud management, you bought the dedicated cloud hardware. If you didn't need cloud management, you bought the non-cloud hardware. Over time, we have gotten away from that, and we have moved to something called Nebula Flex, where instead of having dedicated Nebula only hardware, we've moved to a situation where we've got hardware which can be managed directly. It can be managed with SNMP, or in the case of like access points through a controller, or it can be managed in the cloud. So that way you can standardize on certain SKUs and use the same SKU regardless of whether you're going to be using cloud management for that deployment. So anything that's labeled as Nebula Flex has dual mode functionality, direct management, or cloud management. And then products labeled Nebula Flex Pro, same thing. You can do cloud management, you can do direct management, but we are bundling 1 year of our Nebula Pro license with that device. So we'll talk a little bit more about it in a couple slides, but Nebula Pro unlocks some additional features and we'll go through those. In the case of access points, Nebula Flex Pro also tells you that that device can be managed with a local controller. So if you don't want to use the cloud and you still want to use a local area controller to manage your access points, you still want to buy the Nebula Flex Pro products because those are the ones that can support that. So this is just giving you sort of a quick breakdown here. Our access points, our NWA 50 series, 90 series, 100 and 200 series are all Nebula compatible with Nebula Flex. And that includes our 1100 series as well. On the switch side of things, our Nebula Flex switches are the GS 1920 V2 series, the XS 1930 series, and the XGS 1930 series. And then our security products here, our USG Flex products, are considered Nebula Flex if they do not have a UTM license bundled with them. And then on Nebula Flex Pro, it's any of our access points numbered 500 or higher, usually starting with WAX or WAC. Those include the 1 year of Nebula Flex Pro bundled with them. On the switch side of things, the Nebula Flex Pro switches are the 1350 series, the 2220 series, and the XS 3800 series. And then on the security side of things, it is going to be the USG Flex products, which come bundled with UTM licenses. Will also include 1 year of ProPack. And then the ATP series is kind of its own little thing. Rather than its own dedicated Nebula license, we have what's called a gold license, which includes the Nebula Pro compatibility. So now we'll start going through some of the optional licenses that are available for Nebula. And this is where people tend to get a little confused. So starting, I think it was last year, maybe it was the year before, we moved to a new Nebula licensing model where we reduced the price of our Nebula ProPack licenses. So again, ProPack unlocks some additional features. We also added what's called Plus Pack, which is an in-between that fits between the free version of Nebula and the pro version of Nebula. And this was something that we rolled out specifically to address cloud offerings by Netgear and other lower end vendors. The features aren't as robust as what you get with ProPack, but it includes the main core features that people are looking for at a lower price than what you would get with ProPack. So now the key thing when it comes to these Pro and Plus licenses is licensing is done by organization. So usually an organization in Nebula is your customer, and then you can have multiple sites under that customer. So every device in that organization needs to have a valid license in order for Pro features or Plus features to unlock. If one of the devices does not have a license, the organization will operate in the free mode. So if you've got a situation where you have a customer, but only some of their sites need to have Pro or Plus Pack, then you would split them into two different organizations. One organization would have the sites that need the licenses. One organization would have the sites that don't need the licenses. Now, licenses obviously expire. Usually we're selling them by the year, but there are other options available. So if a device either doesn't come with a license or the license that had been assigned to it expires, you do get notifications both via email and the Nebula interface. And you are given a 15-day grace period. So when that license expires, your whole site doesn't just drop down to the free versions. You're given 15 days to add the license that you need to continue using the Plus or Pro Pack. Hey, Drew, I see your question. I will get to that towards the end. So we're going to do a quick breakdown here of the differences between the free Nebula Plus license and the Pro license. So again, all of them get you access to the Nebula Cloud interface and access to the core features of those products. They give you that zero-touch auto deployment type installation, over-the-air firmware management. They all give you access to our mobile apps. One of the areas here, first areas we're going to hit where you start seeing some differences is the free version of Nebula only keeps 24 hours of log information in the cloud. Plus Pack gets you a week of log information stored in the cloud, and the Pro Pack version of Nebula stores a year's worth of log information in the cloud. The next area here is the number of admin accounts per organization. So it's not, again, that's not your company, that's the per each company that you are managing. With the free version of Nebula, you get 5 different admin accounts. With the Plus Pack, you get up to 8 admin accounts per organization. And then Pro Pack, there is no limit. And then we also have a cloud database that you can use for user authentication or MAC address filtering. So the free version of Nebula, that cloud database only has 50 entries. Plus Pack gets you 100 entries. And then the Pro Pack, there is no limit to the number of entries. They all versions get you the captive portal. They all get you, 802.1x authentication, MAC authentication. The free version of Nebula, if you do not log in for 30 days, it will stop storing and collecting log information. So if you log in and it tells you, hey, cloud saving mode has been enabled, there's just a little link right there in the little notification and you can re-enable logs. But it will cause you issues where if you go in, you haven't touched the site in 6 months and you want to log in and see, how many users have been connected or which users having connectivity issues. If it's in cloud saving mode, you won't have any of that available until you re-enable cloud saving mode and give it a chance to start collecting logs again that can be parsed to gather that information. So going up to the Plus and Pro Pack here, it gives you access to advanced firmware scheduling. So the free version lets you schedule firmware updates. Pro and Plus give you more granularity. You can set different schedules based on the type of device. You can have your switches scheduled to update at a different time than your security gateways. And they also give you the ability to set individual schedules based on individual device. We get you more reporting features with the Plus and Pro Pack, including the ability to set up automated reports that are automatically emailed out and include your logo information. So you can have them set up to go out to your customer, for instance, so they can see what's going on the network that you're managing. It gives us what we call the automatic network topology view. And this is a view which shows us all the devices plugged into your network and which devices are connected to which other devices. Email user alerts require the Plus or the Pro Pack. And then if you're doing guest access and you want to use Wi-Fi vouchers, that requires either the Plus or the Pro Pack. And then the Pro Pack unlocks some additional features which aren't available in Plus Pack. And that includes an audit log, so the ability to see who made what changes into the configurations over time, the ability to clone organizations and synchronize configuration changes between orgs, the ability to back up and restore different configurations in the cloud, the ability to open a ticket directly with our HQ for support issues rather than having to call in to us locally here, advanced AAA features when it comes to the captive portal and radius authentication, um, advanced Wi-Fi reports and the ability to use artificial intelligence to analyze what's going on and make configuration changes, advanced IPTV features, advanced switch surveillance features on that 1350 series of switches, and some advanced VPN functionality. That all requires the Pro Pack. So I know it's a lot, but hopefully gives you some idea here that, you know, the base version is very full featured. And a lot of you, or at least for a lot of your customers, you will not need the Plus or Pro Pack. The free version will be fine for you and your customers. Just to show here, this is the view you get with our Pro Pack with the machine learning. You can see we take a look and chart over time connectivity issues for different clients, and we have the ability to automatically make changes to your wireless configuration based on what we're seeing here to help improve those issues. On the IPTV side of things, you get access to advanced IGMP settings. And again, we use some artificial intelligence to track what's going on your IPTV streams and give you suggestions as to what we think you need to change configuration-wise to solve those issues. Here's that automatic topology view where it shows you, which switch is plugged into which access point, et cetera, to help you with troubleshooting issues. So that is it for per device licensing. Now I want to talk about something which is a per user licensing, and this is our MSP license. So this is independent of the Pro or Plus Pack licenses. And this is a license that you would apply to a user account, and it'll unlock features for that user account on every single customer or organization that they are managing. So again, it's per user. So if you want these features for multiple users, you will need to buy multiple copies of the license. But it applies to all sites that particular account is currently managing. So the first thing that gets you here, and this is the primary thing here, is something called the MSP view. So it's similar to that view where you click on a customer and it shows you all of their sites. Well, this shows you all of your customers and their current status, including whether or not they're using the free version of Nebula, the paid version of Nebula, Plus or Pro, on whether or not any of those sites have recently expired or are about to expire, how many sites each customer has, et cetera. I know some of our larger MSPs really like this feature as being a quick, easy way to sort of see what's going on for all of their customers. And it adds some other features as well. It gives you the ability to do MSP branding, so you can add your own branding to the Nebula interface. So for instance, if you're giving your customers access to Nebula in a read-only mode or something like that, so they can see what's going on, you can add your logo. So when they log into Nebula, they see your company's logo, and we can remove the Zycel support information and replace it with your support information. And we give you the ability to do teams. So as it is right now, as you add a new customer, you will go in and you will add and say, hey, here's all my admins that I want to access and their access levels that I want them to have. With MSP license, you can create teams, and simply, instead of having to add each user to a new organization, you simply create a team and then add or remove the team to different organizations. So it's really helpful if you've got, company or employee turnover and you want to remove, an admin account. You don't have to go to each one of your customers and manually remove it. You simply remove them from the team and they'll automatically be removed from every site that team is assigned to. And then the ability to synchronize certain settings between different customers. So that's what the MSP view does. And now we've got some licenses that are available on the security side of things. So we've got 3 different security gateways that you can be using with your Nebula site. We've got the old dedicated NSG gateways. We have the USG Flex gateways, and we have the ATP series gateways. So all three of those offer some form of unified threat management, which provides additional security features on the gateway, things like content filtering, gateway-based antivirus, malware blocking, intrusion detection and prevention, things like that. Unfortunately, the features of those UTM services are different based on the device. So we've got different security licenses for the NSGs. That would be the NSS Security Pack. The USGs have the UTM Security Pack, and then the ATP series has the gold licenses. So those are the licenses you would need for unlocking security, these UTM features on your security appliance that you may or may not be managing in Nebula. We've also got a secure Wi-Fi license. So that basically allows you to turn one of our managed access points into a what's essentially a VPN appliance. So you want to help do some work from home stuff. One of the challenges you run into is you've got to have them bring in their laptop or their computer, and your IT department's got to configure the VPN. So this is an alternative to that. Another way of doing remote work is you give your employees a SSL or a VPN appliance device. But oftentimes those are set up as routers. They've already got a router from their ISP that's bundled in with their cable modem or their DSL modem that they can't replace, and you end up double natted and have issues. So this gets around that as well. So you simply give them an access point that's managed in Nebula. They take it home, they plug it into their home router. It is a client to that home router, and it'll broadcast a special SSID that their employee can then connect to, that will basically create a VPN back to the office, so they can be accessing those remote resources from their computer just as if they were at home. So it uses, like I said, a special SSID that they connect to, and that SSID has to has WPA encryption, and it has to use 802.1x authentication. So they do need to connect with a username and password before they get access to the corporate office over the VPN tunnel. But from a configuration and setup standpoint, it's something just about any employee can do. They simply need to, give it power and plug that AP into an Ethernet port on their existing router they have at home, and then connect to that SSID. On the APs, we have something called Connect and Protect. So this is sort of like a UTM Lite service that is not done on the gateway. It's done on the access point itself. So this is a per device license. So you can mix and match. You can have an office that has 20 APs, but you can only apply Connect and Protect to say 3 APs, which are in the area where, say, for instance, your customers have access to when they visit your site. So it gives them some basic UTM features. It does these using IP reputation rather than analyzing the traffic. It simply looks at the website that they're trying to go to and looks at that reputation. So you can see here it can block things like sources of spam, proxy sites, botnets, phishing sites, etc. So if for some reason you're using our access points, you're managing them in Nebula, but you're using a different vendor's gateway, or the router that customer has from their ISP doesn't offer UTM services, you can still offer some UTM-like services on the APs. So there are 2 versions. There is the CNP license, which works on our lower end APs, the NWA 1123 ACV3, the WAC 500 and the WAC 500H. And then for our higher powered Wi-Fi 6 APs, we have CNP Plus. So both versions give you that reputation filter for doing the UTM type services. The CNP Plus license gives you additional bandwidth throttling applications, where you can throttle based on application, individual application rather than per user as you would normally do with wireless. So we're almost done here, guys. If this sounds interesting, you can go to nebula.zycel.com. There are credentials there that you can click on, or no, I think there's a button now that you click on to take you to a demo. It's a live demo with real world stuff. So you can log in and see that Nebula interface and start playing around with it. If you're one of our partners and part of our partner program, you can reach out to your salesperson and see about getting some equipment on a 60-day loan. that you can play with in your lab to test it out. And that is it for the official presentation. I'll get to your questions here in just a second. Again, if you have questions, send them in with the question and answer interface. I've been asked to point out to you that most of our webinars are recorded and they are uploaded to YouTube for you to watch them at any time in the future. So if you were late and you want to catch the beginning of this, or you want some of your employees to watch one of our webinars, there's lots of different Zycel channels on YouTube. The one here for North America is Zycel America channel. That's where webinars from myself, Tri, or Marcus will be recorded and archived for you to look at. And then also we are on LinkedIn if you'd like to connect there. So on to some questions. Drew's got a question here. So he's saying, hey, he's an MSP. If he takes over customers from a different, that either, I guess, have their own Zycel equipment already, either they installed it themselves or from a previous MSP who had previously been handling the account. How do I migrate my customers' equipment from their old IT company to your company? So you need to talk to whoever was managing them before, assuming this was in Nebula, they were using Nebula already to manage them. Whoever was managing that customer, whoever owns that customer's account, simply needs to transfer it to your account. So that can be done in the Nebula interface. You can go in there and you can, these days, transfer ownership. It used to be you had to contact us and fill out a form, but these days it can all be done through the Nebula interface. Now, if their equipment is Nebula compatible, but wasn't being managed in Nebula, you simply need to go in and scan the QR code on those devices, or alternately, you can manually enter in the serial number and MAC address into Nebula. And those devices, after a few minutes, will automatically reboot into Nebula managed mode for you. Justin here has a question for me. Previously, when we used Nebula, we had to stop using it because the security gateway did not allow us to disable certain protocols. For PCI compliance, has this changed? I think it's Ike V1. Is it available? Is it to limited certain license level? So Nebula itself, you should be able to set it up to be, even with the free version, to be PCI compliant. It obviously depends a little bit, as you mentioned, on the security gateway, what you are doing. There may be certain security functions you can't use. I think the Ike V1 issue has been solved. That would be a good question to take this and send this to your salesperson and have them bring it up with their security manager. He's a little bit more knowledgeable than I am when it comes to what's required for PCI compliance. But as far as I'm aware, Nebula is fully HIPAA and fully PCI compliant, even with the free version. Yeah, so I believe we should be good there, but again, there may be certain features or functions that you can't use with it, but that Ike issue, I believe, has been solved. Curtis had a question, so he was asking if this was archived. So as mentioned before, it is going to show up on our YouTube channel probably in the next 24 hours. So yeah, absolutely, they can see this. And a lot of these webinars, we do them every month or every other month. So if there's something coming up and you know you aren't going to be able to make it, you can also just log into YouTube and view the version that we've done, you know, the prior month or the month before. So for a lot of that stuff, they're on there. You know, we, as always, you know, as we redo these, we're always kind of, you know, updating things as technology changes or as people point out mistakes in the presentations. In the case of a hostile takeover, so this is again asking about transferring management. So assuming your customer is using Zycel equipment, it was previously managed by another MSP and you cannot get them to transfer ownership. Reach out to our tech support team. There are some steps we will have to go through to verify and prove that you really are managing that customer now, and that should belong to you. And then we can do a transfer on the back end. So it's a little bit more complex, but hopefully it's not a hostile takeover, and you simply need to reach out to the previous MSP and have them make that transfer in the interface. Dave was asking, says the ATP 200 series needs a firmware update before it is Nebula ready. The latest firmware should be Nebula ready, but as you mentioned, when you order something, it may not have the latest firmware on it. Inventory can be floating around in distribution for a while, even with the shortages that we're having. Old inventory comes in and out. And then also, um, sometimes stuff just comes from the factory with older firmware for whatever reason. You may need to update. I believe we're trying to ship everything with the correct firmware on there that's Nebula compatible. So I believe anything new that ships should be ready to go out of the box. But again, if the inventory has been floating around in distribution for a while, it may not. Curtis is asking here, who do I arrange for a demo and with my company and tech sales for Q&A, pricing, etc. We've been using Ubiquity. So you would want to reach out to us here at Zycel. Well, I guess it depends who you are. So if you are one of our partners or you are a reseller buying the product through distribution, you would want to become one of our partners. There's an application on our website. It's pretty straightforward. And then you would be assigned a salesperson here locally. Depending on where you're located, it would either be Andy, David, or Jacob. They would be your sales rep, and they'd be able to arrange dedicated trainings for you. They'd be able to put you in touch with our sales engineer if needed, and they'd be able to hook you up with pricing. For those of you that don't know, if you are a reseller buying through distribution, if you qualify for that partner program, you get discounts automatically applied through everything you buy at distribution. So that's on top of whatever discounts you get based on your current relationship with that distributor. If you are a business or end user, then you would want to contact one of our resellers. You can always call into the office. I think we've got a listing of them on our website, but you can always call into the office or into Zycel at our public number and get transferred to channel sales. And they'll be able to help hunt down, a VAR, MSP, systems integrator, depending on your situation based on where you're located to help you out. If previously an ATP had been set up, lots of security questions today. So just to begin with, I'm going to apologize. I don't do a lot with security. So some of these questions, you may also want to copy and paste this to an email to your sales rep so that you can have the sales engineer or try or security manager review the question and make sure I answered it correctly. So the question was, if an ATP has previously been set up in premise mode, which means not in Nebula, just managed directly. Is there a way to export those settings to Nebula? So at the moment, certain features and settings are available in standalone mode that are not available in the Nebula cloud. And that's true for both the ATPs and the USG Flex series. It was sort of designed that way intentionally with the idea that if you're wanting to use Nebula to manage your gateway, it needs to follow the Nebula design philosophy that everything should be easier and simplified. So because of that, some advanced features are missing. So it makes it, difficult, if impossible, to really run an automated tool to port those settings over because so many of those settings are different or even not there in Nebula. I know, we have been adding additional new features into Nebula. I don't think we're adding a lot of new security features in the near future. Right now, the main focus on Nebula has been on improving the GUI, improving that the interface, making sure everything is consistent, and getting Nebula as easy to use as possible and as consistent as possible before we start going back to adding more and more features into Nebula. Can Nebula be updated to allow dynamic DNS in the VPN setup? I have no idea. Sorry. That would be something, again, send it in to Andy, Jacob, David. Send that question into them via email to get the answer on that. I'm just not familiar enough with configuring security features in Nebula to know the answer. Okay, Chaim was asking, I think, basically the same question that I just answered about the ATPs. Curtis is saying he's a telco in Wisconsin. So um, again, it depends where you're buying from. If you're a channel customer, so some telcos based on your size, some of you are going to come to the telco side of things of Zycel, and some are going to come to the channel side of things. If you are a channel guy, our channel distributors that you would probably be working with would be Cynix, Ingram Micro, D&H, Target, or Wave. So if those names sound familiar, that would be who you would reach out to help you out there. If you are handled by our service provider team, those guys go through a different set of distributors such as Power Intel, Hall Communications, Walker and Associates. So if those names sound familiar, that would be who you'd reach out to either way. And if none of those names sound like somebody that you guys buy equipment to, give us a call. Talk to somebody on the sales team here, and they'll figure out who you should be talking to and working with going forward. Okay, or send me an email. My email's up there on the screen. I should add here. So if you're dealing with Power Intel and Walker, you're probably handled by the service provider side of things. They are really focused on CPE. Um, you know, fiber gateways, DSL gateways, managed gateways, things like that. In some cases, they may refer you back over to the channel side of things because they really often don't like dealing with more of the business oriented networking stuff, the LAN oriented stuff. So, business switches, access points, things like that. So you may end up in a situation where you're talking to both of us. But yeah, I'll take a look at that email and either respond or forward it on to somebody who can respond to answer those questions. And with that, guys, all of the questions that have been sent in have been answered. So I am going to go ahead and end today's webinar. If you have some other questions, feel free to email them to your salesperson, or as you see here, my email is up there on the screen. You can email me directly, seanr@zycel.com. Thanks for turning out, guys. We've got more webinars coming just about every Tuesday and Thursday.